The Homefront, Eureka during World War II. Good morning. Thank you for joining me. For America's 250th, I thought it would be interesting to look at the various experiences of Eureka residents during World War II. This is not comprehensive, but looks at all the highlights in the areas of civil defense, rationing, war bonds, scrap drives, book drives, victory gardens, and the Libby Canning Factory. I'll also touch on the role of the Woodford Theater and a local church. Between 1939 and 1941, Eureka residents and all Americans were very aware of what was happening in Europe and Asia. For the most part, though, life was going on as normal. Eureka between 1939 and 1941 was in fact celebrating. We were the pumpkin capital of the world. Libby, McNeil, and Libby took over the Dickinson Canning Factory in 1929. In 1939, the newly formed Eureka Community Association held the first annual Eureka Pumpkin Festival on October 13th and 14th. Eureka, population about 1,700 at the time, had an estimated 10,000 people visit for this inaugural event. This newspaper clipping from October of 1939 is stunning. It encapsulates what I imagine was the feeling of these pre-war years. It shows our first Eureka Pumpkin Festival queen, Mary Elizabeth Barker, and her court, a celebratory moment. But the headline above and the articles on the side illustrate the anxiety and worry at the edges of celebration. The Pumpkin Festival continued for the next 2 years, bigger and better each year. In 1940, a giant 62-pound pumpkin was sent to President Franklin Roosevelt at the White House via airplane. Behind the scenes, though, the government was preparing not only to support the Allies, but also to possibly defend ourselves. During the 1941 Pumpkin Festival parade, you can see the shift. There are more patriotic floats and flags. These two floats in particular, Pumpkin Patch to Preparedness and U.S. of America for Defense, are clear indications of the buildup of American troops in production since 1940. The 1941 festival was held on September 26th and 27th, just about 2.5 months before the bombing of Pearl Harbor. On September 16, 1940, the Selective Training and Service Act created the first peacetime draft in U.S. history. It required all American men between the ages of 21 and 35 to register. Those selected by a national lottery served on active duty for 12 months in the Western Hemisphere, followed by 10 years in the reserve. The first registration day took place on October 16th. Oleo Township registered 351 men. Weeks later, we sent our first inductees to training camps. There were set quotas for the county every month, and the numbers kept rising. 11 in February 1941, 37 in April, and so on. After war was declared in December 1941, enlistment terms were extended for the duration of the war. At that time, there were 29 Eureka men in the services. By October 1942, there were 122 Eureka men, and a month later, the registration age was expanded to men aged 18 to 37. In August 1945, it was reported that 333 men and women entered the armed forces through the local Selective Service Board. The Woodford County Journal, as well as church newsletters, kept residents informed. They published the soldiers' addresses for letter writing, gave updates on their status, and reported their visits home on furlough. I'll highlight just 2 of their stories. In December of 1939, Edward Myers enlisted in the Marines. He was stationed at Johnstone Island, south of Pearl Harbor, in December of 1941. On July 27, 1943, he was wounded in action on the Solomon Islands. He was one of 3 men who volunteered to attach a cable to a disabled tank under enemy fire so the tank could be towed behind Allied lines. He suffered a gunshot wound to his leg during the event. He was awarded a Silver Star and Purple Heart. His first furlough home was not until 1944. Mary Elizabeth Barker, the first Eureka Pumpkin Festival queen, graduated from Eureka College in 1941. In November 1942, she volunteered for the Waves, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. The journal said she was the first Eureka woman to volunteer. This was the official women's branch of the U.S. Navy Reserve during World War II. Established on July 30th, 1942, the program allowed over 86,000 women to serve in shore roles, freeing up men for sea combat. Mary was eventually trained as a navigator and earned her Naval Air Force wings in 1945. The word defense was used a lot during this period, and all activities were both in support of the troops and in defense of the homeland. For effective coordinated response, there needed to be structure. In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, we were in organization mode at local, county, state, and federal levels. There was the Illinois State Council of Defense, the Woodford County Defense Council, and then our local Civilian Defense Council. Our local council oversaw the work of all the existing agencies and organizations in town and established specific roles and activities for each. The City Council, the local Red Cross, and the American Legion were the principal organizations involved. On February 19, 1942, the Journal reported that there would be an open registration for civilian defense volunteers on Saturday, February 21st. A few weeks later, they reported that 175 had registered so far. All of these volunteers were then assigned to the various organizations under the Defense Council to help with their assigned activities. One of the first groups to be formed was the Ration Board in January 1942. Their offices were on the third floor of the courthouse and later in the Mellick building. Initially, it was about 3 men for the whole county overseeing tire rationing. Rubber was imported in short supply and needed for the troops. Each month, the county was allotted a certain number of certificates for tire purchases, both trucks and passenger cars, and these had to be distributed evenly each week. First, an inspector would visit and determine need. Then, if warranted, an application was filled out and taken to the board. In January of 1942, just 17 tire certificates were allotted for passenger cars and 56 for trucks. Owners' names were listed in the paper. Residents were encouraged to carpool or take the Santa Fe bus, train, or interurban rail car known as the Doodlebug. For an added incentive to save tires, a nationwide speed limit of 35 miles an hour was mandated, and gasoline was rationed beginning in November of 1942. Applicants were ranked in one of 4 categories. A, without unusual need, limited to just 4 gallons a week. B and C were provided extra rations for those who must drive more than 150 miles per month and was essentially for war workers and professionals. Again, names were listed in the paper. The last category, D, was for motorcycles. As you can imagine, the Ration Board, later renamed the Local War Price and Rationing Board, was swamped. In October of 1942, they reorganized with a total of 12 people on the board and divided into the following panels. Tires, cars, bicycles, and typewriters were one group. Commodities was a second group, and rubber boots and shoes were a third group. George Hacker was the overall chair. They hired staff and regularly called for volunteers. Registration for Ration Book 1 began in May of 1942. Every man, woman, and child needed to be registered for their own book, a monumental task. Some books included physical descriptions of the owner, such as height, weight, and eye color, to prevent fraud or black market trading. The first commodity to be rationed was sugar. At registration, people were required to show how much sugar was currently on hand, and that determined if you got stamps. A separate sugar registration for home canning was added later in the summer. Coffee was also added to Book 1. Books 2, 3, and 4 were distributed over the course of 1943. These introduced a complex point system. Red stamps controlled meats and fats, while blue stamps covered canned, frozen, and processed fruits and vegetables. Weekly ration calendars were printed in the paper to help residents keep track, and regular updates were announced. Eureka College student Annette Dickinson stated that Eureka College students would use their ration coupons to purchase groceries, which were taken directly to the school kitchen for them to fix the students' meals. Meat was rationed and permitted on the school menu only on Wednesday and Sunday nights. The Benjamin F. Hacker American Legion Post 466 was founded in 1919 following World War I. The Legion Auxiliary was formed in 1930, and there was also a Junior Legion Auxiliary during the 1940s. The Legion had many roles during the war, not only their normal activities such as fundraising, youth activities, dinners, armistice, and Memorial Days, but also during World War II, they established an air raid warden program, helped with scrap drives, blood drives, served on the draft board, and more. Commanders during the war included Earl Heinrich, Oscar Strother, and Harold Deck. There were 102 Legion members in 1943. The Air Raid Warden Program was a key element of civilian defense. On January 29, 1942, Harold Deck was appointed the Air Raid Warden for Eureka. The first trial blackout was held on August 12, 1942. Resident Sarah Putman later wrote, "They'd have periodic brownouts. When a whistle would blow, you were to close your drapes and turn off your lights for a practice time. We had types of aircraft to memorize, like the P-48 and the B-17s." Unquote. The second blackout trial was held on Friday, July 30th, 1943. The Journal printed a lengthy article on how to decipher the different sound combinations. Approaching air raid was a 2-minute steady blast. An imminent air raid was short blasts on the sound signal. All lights had to be turned off immediately and all traffic stopped. The city was divided into 10 districts with a warden and a committee in each to check on compliance. The time of the test was not announced in advance. The Journal reported the following week that it was a success, with only a few lights coming back on before the all clear was sounded. Another contribution to their fellow veterans was in January of 1944. The Legion built a shelter at the corner of 117 and 24 for hiking servicemen. It included lights, benches, and a small stove, so servicemen did not have to be outdoors while waiting for rides or resting. The Woodford chapter of the American Red Cross was established in June of 1917. In 1940, they had 1,000 members. During the pre-World War II years, the Red Cross was actively recruiting members, raising money for a war relief fund for Europe, and making clothing for refugees. During the war, the National Red Cross gave county chapters and town units quotas to fill for each activity. For example, in October of 1942, they had a quota of 7,100 surgical dressings to be made in 2 months. In addition, the local Red Cross taught courses on home nursing, first aid, sewing, knitting, and more. They also started a junior American Red Cross involving local students in making items for soldiers. They raised money and bought toothpaste, shaving cream, and other care items for soldiers to go in kit bags. They initiated blood drives, and in 1944, they raised funds to furnish a hospital room at Camp Ellis in Fulton County. For 40 years, Bina Hofstetter served as the treasurer of the chapter. During World War II, she also served as the local production chair, overseeing volunteer sewers and knitters. A collection of her papers dating from 1941 to 1945 were left with Eureka Christian Church, and they include various lists of women who volunteered, the number of items sewn and knitted, correspondence with Red Cross organizers, and government publications on organizing locally and instructions for knitters and sewers. The top sewer, by the way, was Mrs. Clara Wilson with 600 hours. Women's groups across Eureka contributed to the Red Cross knitting and sewing quotas. All the different church women's groups and classes, the Home Bureau, the Legion Auxiliary, and even schools. The Red Cross in Eureka and Woodford County and accomplished an amazing amount of work during this period. To finance the war, there were a series of 8 war bond campaigns between 1942 and 1945. Citizens were heavily urged to purchase either low-cost stamps to fill up booklets for a full bond purchase later, or to purchase a full bond outright. Also known as war loans, the Eureka community actively embraced the campaigns. Like the Red Cross system, there were quotas for the county and the towns. In May of 1942, the quota system was launched, and citizens were urged to reserve 10% of their income for war bond purchases. The head of Woodford's War Bond Committee was Richard Dickinson of Eureka. He kept track of all war bond sales across the county, made reports to the press and government, and coordinated all of the organizations assisting with each war bond campaign. For example, the county ag organizations held a victory bond harvest campaign. The Eureka Sportsman's Club held war bond auctions, where a lamb once went for $2,100, as did a bushel of apples. High school and Davenport students had war bond drives. War bonds were sold at the post office, banks, and at Kroger. About every page of every Woodford County Journal edition during these years encouraged war bond purchases. Despite our size, Woodford County routinely topped the list of counties in Illinois with per capita war bond sales. The article here shows per capita purchases in December of 1942 and January of 1943. We did better than Cook County. Over the course of the last 4 campaigns in 1944 and 1945, Woodford County purchased about $5 million worth of bonds. Eureka purchased about $1 million worth of bonds. That was an amazing amount for our small county and town. To keep things interesting and residents motivated to keep buying bonds, there were sponsorship opportunities and contests. During the second campaign in the spring of '43, the amount purchased equaled sponsorship opportunities. $30,000 was a boat. $60,000 was a submarine chaser type of ship. Eureka kept surpassing its goals, and at a last call bond auction netted an additional almost $26,000, putting us at a total of $104,737. For that, we had a P-51 Mustang fighter plane named the Spirit of Eureka, Illinois. During the third war bond campaign, a German helmet was at stake for the top purchase in the county. During the later bond campaigns, there were contests between county towns. In 1945, an assault cargo ship serving in the Pacific was named the USS Woodford for both Woodford County, Illinois, and Kentucky in honor of our impressive fundraising efforts. The demand for metal, rubber, paper, and other materials to supply the troops was high. In this area, Eureka did its part as well. The primary organization overseeing scrap dies for Eureka was the Salvage Committee, headed by Mayor Brian Britt and J.P. Scheid. The American Legion took a major role in this, as well as youth organizations such as 4-H, FFA, the schools, and Boy Scouts. Like other efforts, there were quotas set for the counties and town. The first major drive was launched in August of 1942 with a countywide meeting at the courthouse. Nearly 100 people attended. The drive was held in September and resulted in almost 1,000 tons. Eureka contributed 180 tons with an additional 300 tons collected before the drive. I want to highlight the work of the Boy Scouts. The Creve Coeur Council of the Boy Scouts of America, of which the Eureka Troop was a member, reported in June of 1943 a compilation of their efforts. They distributed about 82,000 posters, leaflets, and bulletins for the government and civic organizations. They collected over 3,000 books for the Victory Book Campaign. They collected almost 550,000 pounds of paper, rags, rubber, and metal by themselves and cooperated in many community salvage drives. They also held war bond and stamp promotion. There were 28 boys in Troop 57 in 1943. They continued to hold drives throughout the war years. The variety of items which could be salvaged for the war effort is very interesting. For example, in July of 1942, the Legion announced a drive to collect all available phonograph records. The records would be remounted and recast into new records to be distributed among the military camps and posts. Another interesting item collected were milkweed pods for life jackets. Nothing was sacred. The article in the lower left reveals that the old Eureka High School bell, the Civil War and World War I cannons in front of the courthouse, and a steam engine used to create Lake Eureka were scrapped. The 27,610-pound steam engine netted a $25 war bond prize, and the 7-ton cannon netted a $10 defense stamp prize. The scrap collectors seemed to purchase the materials, at least in part. In February of 1943, the Salvage Committee reported they had $400 in surplus money from the drive. They donated some of the funds back into war-supporting causes, such as the USO, Red Cross, and the Victory Book Fund Drive. Here is one effort close to my heart, the Victory Book Campaign for Soldiers. This was a national campaign supported by the American Library Association, the American Red Cross, and the USO. Beginning in January of 1942, the Eureka Public Library, under the leadership of librarian Ruth Major, launched local efforts to collect books for soldiers, sailors, and Marines. Eureka had a quota of 500 books out of a national campaign for 6 million books. The first month of the campaign resulted in about 600 donations. All community organizations, adult and youth, contributed to this campaign during the war years. Although no overall total for books donated was recorded, Eureka likely did more than their fair share to support troops. In February of 1943, a call went out for more books to be donated. Newer books that would be of interest to soldiers was preferred. It turns out that a lot of the books donated the previous year were not preferred soldier reading material. The journal reported, quote, "Our fighting men need books for study and relaxation. Put your best books to work for victory," unquote. Towards the close of the war in 1945, families were donating books to be kept by the Eureka Public Library in honor of their soldier children. A special memorial shelf was being built in the library for these books. The Victory Book Campaign also accepted monetary donations. In February 1943, they received $25 from the Salvage Committee and an additional $36 from residents. As book donations often had mixed results in quality and age, in 1943, publishers began to print for soldiers special pocket-sized editions of popular books, known as Armed Services editions. Ruth Major shared this news in the journal in February of 1943 and stated these special books could be purchased with a 25-cent donation. Special coin boxes were placed at convenient locations around town for this purpose. The books printed included classics, mysteries, and current fiction. If this topic interests you, Molly Guptill Manning published a book in 2014 titled "When Books Went to War" about these special editions. It's nice to know that Eureka contributed to this worthy cause. I mentioned that the librarian during this period was Ruth Major. She was the widow of the late Joe Major and was a powerhouse of activism in Eureka during this period. Not only was she the first paid librarian, but she was also an active member of the American Red Cross, the Women's Club, Home Bureau, and the Garden Club. Her interest in gardening led her to be one of the leaders of the Victory Garden Campaign in Eureka. At the time, it was reported that 8 million cans of food per day was needed to feed soldiers. Tin was in short supply and needed for war use, so the Homefront response was to plant victory gardens and promote home canning and preservation of fruits and vegetables. In February of 1942, the newly formed local defense council made plans for a special Victory Garden Committee to advise and encourage residents. In addition to the local garden club, the Farm Bureau and Home Bureau organizations, along with the 4-H youth, were the primary organizers behind this effort. The Victory Garden Committee met on February 20th at the Farm Bureau office. Their goal was to increase the number, size, and quality of gardens to meet the demand of food for defense and better nutrition. Ruth Major specifically was chosen to oversee stimulating town gardens in Eureka. To help in the effort, the University of Illinois distributed a 32-page Illinois Garden Guide, which gave advice and tips on designs, planting, care, and harvesting. The guide was mailed to people who registered with the committee and was also available to pick up at the library. The committee also had a weekly column in the journal titled The Garden Spot. The Victory Garden Committee developed a schedule of activities which they followed consistently through the 4 garden seasons during the war. They established community garden plots in town for people who did not have their own plot. The journal included references to an open plot owned by Henry Thayer and a Dickinson plot in the west part of town. In 1943, a large space was available and contained over 20 plots being cultivated by about 35 people. About September of each year, the committee hosted a harvest show of Victory Gardens. Adults and youth were invited to enter displays of vegetables, fruits, flowers, and more to celebrate this successful growing season. Ribbons were distributed and youth winners were given defense stamps. The Victory Garden Committee also visited Davenport School and educated children about the importance of the Victory Garden. Each student with a garden space was gifted a dozen tomato plants to care for. In 1942, 83 children participated, which was 996 plants. In 1943, 105 children received 1,260 plants. This project was a joint effort by the Eureka Garden Club and the Community Association. The committee visited the students during the summer to inspect the plants and answer any questions they had. Students were also encouraged to enter an essay contest each year, writing about why they wanted a Victory Garden. Winners were chosen and awarded defense stamps. In May of 1942, a poem written by a 5th grade student was published in the journal. Quote, "I have a victory garden. 'Twill help to win the war. Many vegetables I planted that I've never tried before. Potatoes, beans, tomatoes, onions, carrots, and peas. Other plants are in my garden besides just these. All summer in my garden, a busy, happy girl I'll be, mine to be the joy of seeing my plants from weeds kept free. The vegetables I'll sell, defense stamps I'll buy. Little girls can do a lot if they will only try." Unquote. Eureka was fortunate to have a significant cannery in town. The first canning factory was established in 1895, a time when many small factories were established throughout the Midwest. In 1898, Eureka's cannery was purchased by Roger Dickinson. Roger's sons, Eugene and Richard, took on the operation of the plant. The first season, they had some 50 men working, packing corn, beans, and tomatoes with an output of around 6,000 to 8,000 cans a day. By 1903, they dropped tomatoes in favor of canned pumpkin. Dickinson and Company made a small experimental pack of canned pumpkin in 1902, using the variety the Dickinsons brought with them from Kentucky. The experiment was successful. In 1909, Dickinson and Company built a plant in Washington, and in 1925, built a plant in Morton. On May 1st, 1929, Libby McNeil and Libby purchased all of the Dickinson and Company business holdings. Robert Dickinson continued as manager until his retirement in 1950. According to Woodford County Journal articles, operations in 1942 did not significantly shift. In 1943, however, as more men left for war, the labor shortage became an issue. Throughout 1943, 44, and 45, Libby's had large patriotic ads in almost every edition of the journal, from the spring through the fall, pleading for workers. Men, women, and children were welcome to apply for the harvest and canning seasons. Typically, peas were processed in June, corn in late July and August, and pumpkin in September and October. Libby's slogan was, "Food fights for freedom." Industries were encouraged to deduct 10% out of their employees' pay for war bonds. In December of 1942, Libby McNeil Libby was awarded a Minuteman flag, as 90% of their employees were buying war bonds with each month. During the 7th war bond drive, Libby's was cited as meeting their quota of war bond purchases. Here are just a couple of the quarter-plus page ads Libby placed in 1943 to 1945. Heavy emphasis on the soldiers' sacrifices, the food crisis, and doing your part. The second ad is my favorite. Quote, "A great-grandmother, 83 years young, Mrs. Augusta George, worked willingly to help save vital crops last year. She has 3 grandsons and 1 great-grandson in the Navy. If a great-grandmother can help save the crops, so can you." Unquote. Farmers were strongly encouraged to increase production of both food crops, especially corn, and livestock to supply canneries and support the war effort. The government, recognizing that farmers were crucial, assisted farmers with machinery needs, tires, loan assistance, commodity pricing, and more. The biggest support for local farmers came through the Woodford County Farm Bureau, Farm Advisor T.H. Brock, and the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. Both the farmers and the canneries struggled with the increased production due to the labor shortage. After 1943, both sought the help of a new labor source in the area, German prisoners of war. Camp Ellis in Fulton County was a massive World War II U.S. Army training center and POW camp. Operating from 1943 to 1945, the sprawling 18,000-acre site trained over 125,000 troops and housed up to 5,000 German prisoners of war. In 1944, Libby's contracted with the government to have POWs assist with the corn canning season. On July 27th, Libby's announced the POW plans to the community in a journal article. At that time, they thought about 250 POWs would be housed at the college, but later determined that only 50 could be sufficiently housed for the 6-week period in Pritchard Gymnasium. The remaining were housed in Libby's warehouse in Washington. The company said their policy would be to segregate the Germans in certain departments not adjacent to Americans in the plants. Army regulations stated that there should be no talking between Americans and the prisoners, and that no one could come near the areas which will be occupied by the prisoners. Food would be supplied by the government through Camp Ellis. POWs working in the factory were paid 10 cents an hour and limited to 12 hours per day, 6 days a week. In addition, they received a 10-cent per day allowance. Residents' memories of the period stressed the no talking rule at Libby's and the Germans singing. Sarah Putnam, who worked in the factory, stated that, quote, "There were 2 girls who were caught behind the railroad tracks with 2 of them, and they were fired and the guys sent to work in the fields," unquote. Residents noted the Germans singing as they marched from the college to the cannery down Darsh Street and on the steps of the gym in the evenings and early mornings. A Eureka Christian Church newsletter sent to servicemen and women remarked, quote, "Everyone in the community is interested in their singing. They sing a great number of folk songs and some Army songs," unquote. Maurice Pfeiffer recalled, quote, "People thought the singing was beautiful, but actually the prisoners were singing dirty songs and people didn't know it," unquote. On Sundays, religious services in German were held. In 1944, Reverend J.F. Schnack, minister at the St. John's Lutheran Church in Secor, held services for the POWs at the gymnasium. For the most part, residents saw that the Germans were hard workers. Only occasionally did one try to sabotage the machinery. A prisoner reportedly wandered off campus down Adams Road, but soon returned. At Washington, one prisoner, Reinhold Pebel, escaped from Washington in September of 1945. He was caught by the FBI in Chicago 2 years later. He recorded his experiences as a POW in his memoir, Enemies Are Human. In 1945, the POWs were all housed in Washington and were trucked to either the Eureka or Morton plants or to work on area farms throughout the canning season. Mary Kerr's books on Washington and Camp Ellis record memories from local farmers of the POWs assisting on their farms. James Ulrich, Bill Martin, Leslie Wetstein, Roy Fisher, Maurice Yorty, Andrew Brockman, and Robert Knapp shared their stories. Leslie Wetstein stated he would go to his brother Joseph's farm and talk to the POWs who were working in the pea vineries there. He said they were good workers, weren't happy about the war, and wanted to stay in America. He said a guard was always with them. His father, Charles, who spoke German, conversed with the POWs and said they were glad to be here and out of the war. Apparently, the no-talking rule was a lot laxer in the fields. Robert Knapp said that someone asked a guard about the possibility of a POW taking the gun from him. The guard showed them that the ammunition clip was safe in his pocket. Farmers could hire the POWs to work for them on their farms, doing other jobs as well. As early as 1904, movies were shown in Eureka. The Woodford Theater in the 100 block of South Main was built by H.U. Bailey in 1938. The grand opening on April 2nd featured a special multi-page insert in the Woodford County Journal showcasing the, quote, modern, spacious, comfortable theater. The insert even included a brief congratulatory message from Ronald Reagan, and they opened showing Reagan in the Sergeant Murphy film. Movie theaters were an important element of the home front during World War II. It was where residents could watch newsreels, and it served as a temporary reprieve from daily life. The theater also served as a partner in the community. In 1942, when the war decreed no outdoor Christmas lights or decorations, the Businessmen's Association scrambled to change its plans. They ended up giving children treats on Christmas Day after a free movie showing. The theater was used for war-related events such as the Silco Health for Victory meeting in April of 1943. They supported local groups such as the American Legion, who sponsored the movie We Are the Marines in April of 1943, and advanced ticket sales went to war bond purchases. The Woodford also held special pre-release bond shows. If you purchased a bond, you got into a special premiere showing before everyone else. In June of 1945, $1,750 worth of bonds were purchased in anticipation of the war comedy Practically Yours, starring Claudette Colbert and Fred McMurray. Another way the theater supported troops was by drawing a soldier's name once a month and sending them $10 cash. Sam Blunier was one of the recipients in 1943. The theater faced some challenges. In 1943, the ticket price for adults had to be raised by 5 cents to 35 cents total due to increases in the federal defense tax. They kept children's prices the same. I could not find the children's prices, but in 1938, when the Woodford opened, it was just 10 cents. In 1945, an article in the Journal let residents know that the marquee was dimmer due to a new war production board limit of 60 watts rather than the theater's normal several thousand watts. The Woodford Theater showed films weekly, many of which were war-themed. Here are just a few. Laurel and Hardy's Air Raid Wardens, Richard Green in Flying Fortress, and James Cagney in Yankee Doodle Dandy. In April of 1944, there was a special midnight opening show of Irving Berlin's This is the Army, starring Ronald Reagan, Joan Leslie, and George Murphy. The musical comedy was about a wounded World War I soldier who becomes a producer and stages a show for the armed forces in World War II. The film was shown the following 2 days in Eureka as well. Proceeds went to the Red Cross and the Army and Navy Relief. Special ticket prices were 55 cents for adults and 20 cents for children. Another final critical part of the community during these years was churches. Every church in Eureka unified their congregations in supporting the war effort, even if they themselves were conscientious objectors. I have access to the Eureka Christian Church's archives, so I'm going to share their activities as an example. They, like many other churches, kept an honor roll of women and men from the church, college, and town who went to war. In December of 1943, they had 146 men and women on their honor roll. They shared the addresses of the men and women for letter writing. Reverend Donald Salmon performed many marriages as soldiers left for service. They prayed, grieved, and held funeral services with families when they heard the worst possible Gold Star news. They invited the Jewish Rabbi Harry, pastor of Peoria, to deliver sermons on occasion. Reverend Salmon delivered sermons at the Peoria Jewish Synagogue as well. Groups such as the Red Cross used the church for meetings and workshops. The church raised funds for bond purchases. They held clothing drives for those affected by the war, including Japanese Americans in an internment camp in Wyoming. For 4 years, they published a special monthly newsletter that was titled Christian Church Tidings for servicemen and women and mailed it to them. The newsletter contained soldier updates, town updates, prayers, and more. The church shared the soldiers' letters with the congregation during services, in bulletins, and newsletters. One special letter was printed in the Eureka Christian Church Bulletin on April 11, 1943. It was written by Ellis Sammy Adams from the Middle East. He had just been home in January of 1943 and was able to see his wife and infant son Michael at their home on James Street for a few days. He left again in early March 1943 as part of the 376 Heavy Bombardment Group. He wrote this letter sometime in late March, reflecting on the beauty of the Christian church and the importance of Christian fellowship during war. On April 4th, 7 days before this letter was shared on a church bulletin, he was part of a 9-man crew aboard the Lady Be Good. It was the crew and plane's first bombing mission over Naples, Italy. On the return flight, the plane missed the landing field, and they flew 2 hours before parachuting out into the desert at low altitude as the plane ran out of fuel and crashed. The day after this letter was shared, his family learned he was missing in action. In truth, he had already perished in the desert. The church grieved with the family and community. When the crew's bodies were finally found in February of 1960, Samuel was finally returned to Eureka for a memorial service on March 25, 1960, with the Eureka Christian Church minister officiating and the American Legion performing military rites. Another thing the Eureka Christian Church did was sponsor a Jewish refugee family. Louis and Greta Rosenweig lived in Kassel, Germany. They were a middle-class Jewish family with 2 children. As anti-Semitism increased, their life began to change. In November of 1938, their synagogue was damaged and Jewish orphanage was destroyed. The next day, their apartment was stormed and they were arrested. They sent their daughter, Irmgard, to England on the Kinder transport in January or February 1939. Their son, Ernst, was already out of the country. Louis and Greta were not able to escape until May, when they got on one of the last boats out of Italy for America, arriving in late May 1940. Irmgard joined them in late July. They stayed at the Scattergood Hostel in Iowa for 5 months. In July of 1940, Eureka Christian Church started to discuss the prospect of sponsoring a family. In December, biographies of the Rosenweig family were shared with the church, and a committee traveled to Iowa to meet them. The family arrived in Eureka in early February 1941. The church provided them with an apartment, household goods, and monthly funds. Irmgard entered Eureka High School and worked as a store clerk on weekends. Greta eventually found full-time work as a dietitian at Eureka College. Louis eventually found work at an auditing firm in Peoria. The family became friends with many people in the church and the community. Irmgard won the DAR Award and graduated from Eureka High School in 1943. She then entered Eureka College and later became a social worker. Louis and Greta became citizens in 1945. Their son Ernst was finally able to join the family in Eureka in 1947, the first time they had seen him in 8 years. The family left Eureka in 1956, but have never forgotten the role Eureka played in their journey and have made several return visits. The church has acted in unison as well as individually. Union holiday services have taken place since at least 1882, and the Inter-Church Committee of Eureka was established about 1920. In May of 1945, as Germany's defeat was looking certain, the Inter-Church Committee planned a VE service. The government, church, patriotic, and service groups called for any celebrations to be somber in tone. On May 3rd, the plan was published that on the day victory is declared, the town would gather for worship at 7:30 p.m. that day or 7:30 p.m. the next day if the announcement came after 6 p.m. If the weather was good, it was to be held on the courthouse lawn. If the weather was not good, it would be at the Eureka High School auditorium. The announcement came at 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning, May 8th, 1945. Businesses and schools closed for the day. The community gathered at the high school auditorium at 7:30 p.m. that night. Professor John Barry opened the service by stating, quote, "We rejoice with humility and hesitation, and our rejoicing is saddened as we are aware of the price that has been paid," unquote. Reverend Salmon reviewed major war events. Reverend Wendell Pontius of the Presbyterian Church spoke on the dangers of racial hatred and disunity. The colors were presented by the American Legion. On Tuesday, August 14th at 6 p.m., VJ Day was announced. This time, the mood was jubilant. Eureka's fire siren was turned loose shortly after 6 p.m. and joined in the general noise making, including car horns, shotguns, and other firearms. A 2-day holiday was declared and schools and businesses were closed. On Wednesday night, a community Victory Day service was held on the courthouse lawn. It opened with a presentation of colors by the Legion and included singing of America and Rock of Ages. There was a scripture reading and prayer. The county war bond chairman, Richard Dickinson, and the city and school superintendent spoke. A memorial for the war dead was held, and Mrs. Wade Collins sang the Lord's Prayer. The service concluded with the sounding of taps and a benediction. The Journal article the following day recapped Eureka's contributions during the war. First, we went over the top in all bond drives. Second, 333 persons entered the armed forces through the local Selective Service Board. Third, at least 9 men lost their lives. Fourth, we contributed workers in the war industries. And fifth, men, women, and children, individually and through organizations, churches, and businesses, all did their share to help bring about victory. Thank you for your joining me tonight with this presentation. I really enjoyed putting this together and learning more about Eureka during this critical period. Thank you.